Today was a nice private day. I didn't have to look at all these eyes and these masks, because when I look at your eyes, you don't know who is behind them. Being a victim of a crime, were they related to some of the ones who sent the death threats, or could they be some of the, I mean, I think it's terrible. And I think there's this one doctor on YouTube. I agreed with him. I told him that last night. I said, you don't forgive these people for this. No. And it made no sense and all this other crap to restrict. I think they're restricting air from the sick and dying so they could grab this money for non-essential. If they used that money for medical upgrades like new medical equipment or anything like that and patient care. But when I'm seeing at another place in Syracuse, the construction beyond, and the terrorism and the abuse and more. No one else ever bothered me or bullied me except this one cunt. Now I said, I'm done then, because then I called Oneida and I found out they're accepting new patients for chemo. And I told my father they were lying. I'm done. And I told him we were done before we left the house. This was our last trip. But that's it. I called. I had enough of this filthy cunt. When no one else, even the ones coming in, they never bothered me. Private room. This place is a little small, but it was nice to this room and this couple. This was a woman. And she mentioned kitchens. I know he knows kitchen. And Sam Kitchen. When I told him Sam Kitchen, I didn't have to say another word. He knew exactly where the guy lived. And he's wondering if her mother, maybe she's her, Alberta Capito, because he thought his buddy Capito's sister married him. Capito was going to be best man at the wedding, but he just got out of the military. It was a goof up or something, and he didn't figure he could handle, so he took all the pictures at the wedding. And Dave Shorey was there. The county sheriff was the escort, and his deputy of my folks' wedding. They escorted in there and back. And he's listing all these names. He goes, if you see this woman, ask her if she knows Newell's up the street, the old farmhouse. Ask her if she knows Kernan, who worked at the Washington Post. The neighbor found the article that guy wrote of the two of them in the 40s taking their sleds up to the top of this hill. Back then you could do a lot of this stuff. And take that sled and get at a high rate of speed and cross the main highway, go all the way down. I'm not sure how far he said that they got by, almost to the arena before they ran out of steam. And they didn't have to worry about cars back then, because that highway was technically a small, more or less dirt road. And then he'd asked me to mention if she remembers when that bridge down the street was burned. It was a wood bridge, and they did some damage to somebody's car, and the guy got mad and they burned it. Now, of course, this guy was a big name, so they weren't going to touch him. Then mentioned Loomis, Weavers. We're related to Weavers. I found the stuff. I'm the seventh generation. The seventh generation was supposed to have twins. Well, that didn't happen, did it? Because I would have had twins, according to what the story was. And probably even knew Cookenham. I mean, because they knew Manning. We painted the house. He gave the land to the college. He's listed telling me all these other names too, that he says if he knows. And he goes, if that's who that is, ask her. And I'm trying to think who else was best man or whatever they call it, the wedding. And then I probably knew Bob Hatch too. Bob Hatch, remember, they lived in the other house while he was finishing this house. grabbed my mother and attempted to put her in his car. And his buddy says, "You put her down, Bob. You put her down, Bob." And he kept it up. And Bob reluctantly put my mother down. Within a couple of days later, the guy who made Bob Hatch put my mother down, not put her in, because he knew he got her in the car, she was done. He would have raped her and more, because my father told me some stories. He used to tie his mother up in a closet when he wanted to get out. He says his sister was nice. He said he was a real nice guy until he came back from the Korean War. He damns the Marines. He was a Marine. He said he was great. When he came back, his mind was totally gone. The stunts he used to do, especially with animals, my father called him a sick bastard. When he called him out, "Take a look at your clothesline," what he did. Oh, the guy who saved my mother, a couple days later on construction, a wrecking ball came and took off his legs. And my father did the Burstone Road Bridge, the Marcy Bridge, the Little Falls Interchange. He blew that mountain apart. That was 1971. A lot of pipeline construction. He did, yeah, because it was a one-way bridge if you go another way to Marcy. I remember the Burstone Road. The North Utica Bridge he did too. And then he moved in Slim Whitman at the arena in the 50s. My mother loved him. I mean, anything he did, he got to go see for free. My mother seen Vincent Price twice, once right down in town. And then he came back and he was at SU, so she spent the night with me and was all excited about seeing Vincent Price a second time. And she was a Vincent Price lover. She was right next to Vincent Price. They were talking right here in town. And one of the kids whose mother owned a newspaper store called him Mr. Wells. He didn't realize it was Vincent Price. Trying to think who else was at the wedding. When my mother walked down the aisle alone, would not let her brother, and would not let Western walk her. No, she walked alone. And you think about that. And she lost the kid before me and bled the whole time with me. It was a tough one, but the battles thought they wanted to throw her out of hospital on late December 23rd. Because she said, they said you might be pregnant, but you're not having a kid tonight. No, she didn't show. Battles called, you admit her. She's giving birth any time. They could not believe it. I never had a chance to sleep in a bassinet. Once I was born, the nurses held me all the time. She used to tell me I made one nurse cry because I was so tiny that I could only wear doll clothes. And I was the very first baby in his life, Battles' life, that he ever let home a preemie. My mother was going home that following Tuesday. And Battles let her take me home that same day. Merry Christmas. You could take her home. I don't want her in this hospital. There was a water main break and I'm worried. There's a 5-pound baby who's in worse shape. I'm keeping him. He was going to keep me sometime to January, and he told her, you take her home. I think she'd be safer home. I was 4.5 pounds when I left. And that Christmas, they had a big spread for the parents, both him and her, and I found all those little objects. Anyhow, this was funny with this woman today. And her husband was nice. He was a sergeant, and I asked her, I should have realized with Colonel Klink, he was smart. However that got divorced, that was smart. Ooh. I only like him with Colonel Klink because of that monocle and his... Anyhow, this guy was, her husband was a sergeant. And it sounded like they had different ranks in sergeant. And then I asked about colonel. He says colonel's higher ranked. I just was wondering. I think he said army, just like this other guy on YouTube. He called himself a colonel in the U.S. Army, I guess. I don't know. I didn't get into snooping into all his. He goes, I'm a notorious. I'm an open book. Well, sometimes you're an idiot too. I mean, some of his stuff is funny.